Hello, Sita. How you doing?
Hi, Alex. I'm well.
Good to see you.
Good, yeah, it is. I'm in a very hot Pretoria. We are burning.
Wow. All the way from there.
Yeah. How are you? Hi, Ignition.
Ignacio is also here. Yeah.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah. You should put me in your suitcase. I see you going all over and I'm stuck here.
All the way from there. Ignacio's also here. Yeah.
There's an echo, or is that just me?
Yeah, because probably Ignacio is following the YouTube channel.
Oh,
Yes, but now there is no echo, I think. I think I got it.
No, okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So there's Antonio Francina signing. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. He's also here.
Hay que explicarle a Antonio, no sé si le habrá explicado algo Elena o qué le habrá dicho Elena. Antonio, good morning.
Good morning. Good
How
morning.
are you doing? We've been told that you can't stay for the whole focus group, right?
Yes, yes, I have some problems. Maybe up to the 3:30. I have to leave the meeting.
Sorry, what time?
3:30.
Okay. No, well, then, yeah, 3:30. Then maybe you can reply to the questions. And if you can't be, I mean, because I thought you would only be able to stay for some minutes, but if you can stay for an hour and a half.
Yes, yes, I can stay an hour and a half, yes.
I think we have enough time.
Ah, okay.
You know, we have, then what we will do, we have Wilson is ill. He had some problems tonight. So I will replace him also in representation of the project. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
So Alex, I will replace Wilson, not Antonio.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so-
Good morning, Kuhn, and good morning, Gabriel. How are you doing?
Hello, greetings from Athens. Very glad to see you.
Perfect.
Glad to see you too.
Thank you for the invitation.
Ciao.
Okay, great.
Se puoi venire da me un attimo perché sto facendo una videoconferenza. No, 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 è ne ho da fare per un...
Okay, so I'm gonna try to start now. Just know the time.
We're still missing Michal.
Michal.
Yeah. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think he should be. Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Just
Let's
introduce
start
you. We can wait for like 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
I see Kun there. Already.
Yeah, Kuhn is there, very serious. I can see him too.
So Professor Amitis, we met some of your colleagues back in Hungary last week.
Yes, they have just compiled minutes with all meetings that took place in Budapest.
Budapest,
This
yeah.
is very interesting and exciting for me. And probably my university will promote some networking agendas with you and other interested colleagues in the near future. I have to submit to the dean my recommendation based on the meeting results, but that was very interesting.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
and the topic is quite sensitive in Europe.
I know.
Okay. Right.
It is.
The role of families.
Okay.
So this is a message for Kuhn. Kuhn, as Wilson can't come because he's having some health problems. He had tonight some kind of he will not be here. I will replace him, but he will help you with the conclusion. So maybe he can proofread after you make the document. So I think that will enrich it even more. Okay, good morning,
How are you doing?
Michal.
Afternoon.
How are you doing?
Good morning, Javier. How are you? Thanks.
Good that
Pretty good.
Sita is here because I see no gender equality at all. Where are all the women?
Exactly.
Wow, this is
Okay, so I'm gonna start. Nothing. I mean, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. As you may know, since 2019, a group of civil society organizations has been committed to prepare the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family in 2024. In this regard, we're enriching a civil society declaration that is the building, following the 4 megatrends that the United Nations Department of Economic Affairs has suggested. And on this occasion, the megatrend in turn was urbanization and international migration, with a special focus on urbanization and families. We expect this focus group to enrich the civil society declaration with substantial contributions from various perspectives shared by experts around the globe. Thank you very much to all of you for your participation and interest in this project. And I also want to thank the civil society representatives and other stakeholders following this meeting via YouTube, and Kumbermate for his work in the preparation and future work around it. We have agreed and sent in advance a questionnaire made of 9 questions. This meeting will consist of the replies from each expert to each question and will be expected not to exceed more than 2 minutes. All other participants are welcome to attend in an observer capacity only. The transcription of the meeting will be used to produce a publication and include final recommendations based on the points participants will have raised. The final outcome will contribute to adjusting and enhancing the recommendations of the Civil Society Declaration on the occasion of the 2024 anniversary of the International Year of the Family. All the participants will be properly quoted, and the documentation will be used for our advocacy work under the terms of Creative Commons public license. This means our publication will be not used for commercial use in any case. And now, with any further delay, I will give the floor to each expert in alphabetical order, starting with the following question. Let me first also introduce to the experts right now. So we have here Gabriela Mitsis from Greece. He's the Director of Social Administration Research Laboratory of the University of West Attica. We have also Antonio Francina, Head of Communications Office of the Veneto region. Then we're having Ignacio Socias, representing the Inclusive Cities for Sustainable Families project on behalf of Wilson Levy, the Director of the Postgraduate Program on Smart Cities and Sustainable Cities from the Uninova University. We also have Michal Michalski from Poland, Professor of the Department of Economic Ethics and Director of the Institute for Family and Society Studies Foundation at the University of Adam Mickiewicz in Poznan. And we have Sita Mokomane, Associate Professor at the University of Pretoria in Demography and Health and Society. He holds a PhD and both from the Australian National University and has extensive research, policy, and programmatic expertise in the field of family studies, with a specific interest in work-family interface, social policy analysis, and social protection. Now I'll start with the first question. How can urban families be at the center of social integration strategies to face demographic challenges? I'll give the floor to Professor Mitsis.
Greetings to everyone. Thank you again for this kind invitation. The topic that you have chosen to discuss is a very sensitive issue, at least for the European agenda. So my focus will be on Europe. So let me start with addressing the first question. First of all, European families living in urban areas, they face strong socio-economic challenges linked particularly to three different risks: unemployment, poverty, and of course, social exclusion. These challenges create serious risks for the prosperity and resilience of the whole European society, not just for families and their members, if connected with other more serious risks related to low fertility, aging, and of course, the critical issue of pension payment and adequacy. In this respect, urban families should be at the center of interrelated public policies. So I focus on the role of public policies that may affect 4 different or even 5 different situations. The employment situation of all working families with children through industrial relations policies, including minimum wages, a critical issue nowadays discussing between the European Commission and member states. The coverage of specific social risks for all working families with children through the so-called social insurance policy, including sickness benefits and pensions. The third situation, the financial situation of all families, particularly those with children, through family policies designed at the national level, but implemented more or less at regional and local settlements. Fourth, decision of individuals to become parents. I think this is of great socio-political value in Europe, the decision of individuals to become parents. What is the key term, the key policy here? Demographic policies. And of course, don't forget large families. Here we have different situation. We have in Europe to improve the decision of parents to create and support large families through population policies. What about population?
I may have to leave the rest of your answer to the end or for the other answers.
Yes. What about population policies? So I will close with that. It should be defined as a set of measures taken by national governments and supported by regional or local authorities to modify the way a national population is changing, either by promoting large families or increase legal residency in this specific territory. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Francina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, I agree with Professor Amitzis, but I would like to underline the cultural problem, because there is not only an economic problem, but also a cultural problem in this field. Of course, there is the lack of family policies, the lack of housing policies, for example, and services for the family. This is a problem in Europe. The problem is quite different in South America and in Asia or Africa, where we have to deal with other kind of aspects of the population, demography. In Europe, the decline of population, from my point of view, is the result of a society who don't believe in the family. This is the problem. We have to choose between consumer, for example, and family. In Italy, we can say that in the Italian Constitution, is written that the family is very important, but we don't have any real policies for the family. And this is the gist of the problem, I'd say, in Europe. Is a cultural problem. Of course, as Professor Amice said, there are a lot of economic aspects, but they are the result of the lack of cultural approach to the problem of the family. So I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Francina. And now I'm going to give the floor to back to Ignacio, please.
Okay, so good morning again from New York. And I think that social integration, from what we have learned in this project, has three very clear requirements. First, education. You can't be socially integrated if education doesn't work well. And we have some examples, I'm thinking in Brazil, for instance, where the lack of quality of public education is a real problem that impedes, that makes for young people many times impossible to get socially integrated. So helping families to be good educators as parents, as grandparents, as siblings, and also by having a good educational system, I think it's very, very important. Second, to be free to choose. Families have to make choices all the time. And quite often, they feel they can't be free because of their economic situation, professional situation, etc. We have, for instance, this example of France, where during the past decades, families have been able to choose, for instance, the number of children they want, the configuration of their families. And this brings me to the third and last point. When you are free to choose, you feel responsible for your choices, and then you can be accountable for them. So this responsibility, this accountability that should come after education and freedom, I think it's another very important point. Because if not, we, for instance, with subsidies, we get people solving the present situation for today, but not knowing what they can choose for the future and not making them accountable for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Professor Michalski, you have the floor.
Hello to everybody. Greetings from Poland. It's a pleasure for me to be here. When it comes to this question, I would like to start from the maybe like two things that I think address the problem. First is, in my opinion, and on the basis of what I have found in the course of my research work and literature, I think first thing is that family is the basic social integration group, institution, which means that to a large extent, what happens in the family means that the final product of the family functioning is that it produces, or it should produce, the individuals who are ready to join the larger structures, macro structures of the society, which means that let's say if the family is missing, well, we have the social integration problem, which means that why am I saying this? It makes the family, I would say, as a natural and basic building block for social integration in the community. Yes, because let's say the neighborhood consists mostly of families, in fact, yes, and families, each family on its own, like they on a daily basis makes the social integration. So this is, I think, fundamental to understand the role of the family. So this is one thing. Second thing, because cities and towns are different, yes, I wonder if some interesting recommendation would not be that we would recommend, or I would recommend, forming so-called family councils in each city. This is the example of the Poznań that I work and live in, and we have one of the first family councils at the governor's office for the whole region. But at the same time, there is functioning there's something similar at the president of the city, which means that this council mostly consists of people from NGOs, of course, from family NGOs. And this is the council which knows the situation locally and is able to give advices on some real issues, real needs, real problems in this given community, in this given city, let's say. And this is I think it could be useful because sometimes some of the, I would say, not tailor-made, but some universal solutions may not work in all the cities. But I think this so-called family council could be a useful tool for evaluating the situation in the city and being a kind of like a pool for ideas or for solutions.
Thank you, Professor Michalski.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is my advice. Thank you.
Now, before giving the floor to Professor Mokomani, I'm just going to welcome Renata Kaczmarska. She's the focal point on the family for the whole UN system, and she has just joined. So, Professor Mokomani, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And greetings all from Pretoria in South Africa. I'm going to address this question and all the others from my experience of Africa, where I am from and where I am based. But in terms of this first question, I want to just say that I think urban areas have unique demographic challenges such as low fertility rates, high proportion of migrant populations, and more youthful age structures as young people move to urban areas and search for job and educational opportunities. But I think we need to recognize that these challenges differ between urban areas within countries and between countries. Mining towns, for example, will have high proportions of young migrant men, and their challenges will differ, for example, with an urban area in a border town where, at least in Africa, have high proportions of migrant families and young women who work as cross-border traders. So I think social integration strategies must really be context-specific in addressing these demographic challenges and recognize that these differ from those of families in rural areas. Previous speakers have talked about job creation, housing, education, and I agree with that, but the education needs of someone in an urban area really differs from someone in a rural area, and the job requirements as well. Housing, just the urban planning should differ. So that's my contribution to this thing, and it has to be context specific. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mokomani. Now I'm gonna just turn to the second question. What are the best ways to address systemic poverty and inequality in urban settlements? So again, I'm gonna start with Professor Amitzis. Please, you have the floor.
Taking into account the comment by Mr. Ignacio Socias, I think we should be always careful with the use of terms, particularly when we are using complex terms not defined by international organizations like social integration or poverty. It's very critical to have a consensus on the use of these terms. Taking into account that in your questions, you use both definitions, but without defining social integration and poverty, I would recommend the following. When we are referring to social integration, we may include access to key services and rights, including health, education, and housing. When you use the term poverty, we may distinguish between economic aspects of hardship or difficulty. So my recommendation in the second question about addressing systemic poverty and inequality are the following. The first is, of course, the development of active employment policies, including adequate minimum wages. I think this is a commonly accepted framework, not only in Europe, across the globe. The second is development of policies and programs to combat both extreme and relative income poverty of families. Third recommendation, policies and programs that need to address family risks related to children costs, particularly through family benefits or family grants. But they should not be focused only on extreme poor families, but also on middle income families. And my last question, which is very critical for countries like the USA and Canada, we have not to forget tax credits and advantages for families with children. So I summarize employment, access to income, addressing family risks, and of course tax credits and advantages. So here are my recommendations for poverty. As you may understand, I have chosen a different path related to social integration. It's rather different for me, integration related to poverty.
Thank you, Professor Amici. Now I turn to Mr. Francina.
Okay, thank you. From my point of view, we must avoid ghettos in the towns. That is to avoid neighbors with height concentrated of poverty, and guarantee services, schools, meeting places, places where the people can play any kind of sports, for example, but also cultural spaces in the neighbors, in the districts of the town, with high connections with the city centers to peripheral districts. The new towns must be connected, and we must avoid high concentration of poverty. This is a great problem, because a high concentration of poverty means also high tensions and social tensions. We have to create a new idea of town, a town where people can exchange experiences, not the town with districts of poverty and the rich or medium classes and so on. No, we have to mix together to guarantee social spaces, spaces for the sports, for the education, cultural spaces, for everything. This is my point of view about the inequality in the urban settlements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Francina. Ignacio, please have the floor.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you very much for your comments, Professor Amici, because I think they help us to sort of move on and get a more global concept. In my position today, and as I am replacing basically Wilson Levy from Brazil, who had this health problem at last minute, I want to refer now, I will talk about social integration later, to thinking in South America and in Brazil specifically, in this problem of many people going from the rural areas to the cities and not finding a way to really overcome poverty there. And I think that has a lot to do, and that will be my main suggestion, to linking the labor market needs to education opportunities for these people who migrate within the same country from the rural areas to the cities. We have known already in Sao Paulo, where our project is, or in Mogi das Cruzes, or in Curitiba, some initiatives to do this, and they have been very, very effective. We should probably consider also the problem we can find of inequality, of access of women to these education opportunities. As you know, in Brazil, as in other South American countries, there is this problem of the number of single mothers that can't really have, we could say, a full family because the father is absent, and at the same time get the possibility to get out of poverty through adjusting to the labor market better. That will be my reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Professor Michalski, please.
Thank you very much. So when it comes to strengthening, addressing the poverty and inequality in urban settlements, first things that I would recommend, and I think that is maybe in some places of the world, the hardest or the most difficult recommendation that could be communicated is strengthening family ties, which means that strengthening marriage and making the stable and, let's say, intact family target, yes, because on the basis of the research that we have from different places of the world, we see that the marriage and the stable family is the best remedy for poverty. Yes, and this is the fact from the research. So this is the thing that I think should be somehow addressed, even though I know that in some places it's not really popular to communicate this today. But Ignacio mentioned single motherhood. Yes, single motherhood is the issue that is connected with, for example, is connected with the situation how the marriage is also culturally, not also legally, but culturally respected and, let's say, secured. And this is in the long run the best also situation for the human capital in terms of children development, human capital production. When it comes to inequality, I would only mention this, what was mentioned in the last point, this access to housing and services. I would also put stress on it that this access to different services like sports services, different free time opportunities is also, in my opinion, important.
Thank you, Professor Michalski. I give the floor to Professor Mokomane, please.
Thank you very much, Alex. And coming last, most of my points have been taken, but something additional I would like to say is that maybe to address the poverty and inequality, also go beyond conceptualizing them as income poverty and income inequality. And I like some of the points that came, and I agree with them that as much as I agree in developing strategies for quality job creation, look at things like creating urban areas that recognize and provide spaces for cultural spaces, education, and so on, other improving access to health services. And I think housing is a very big issue that I agree, and can also lead to social integration and social cohesion. Owning one's home provides really stability and security. And for many people in low-income household, just having a house really gives hope. And I think that we look at poverty and inequality as multidimensional and address those cultural, social aspects, we can really address the systematic poverty and inequality in our urban settlements. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mokomane. Now we're going to the next question. How can help reach smaller businesses, informal workers, and at-risk sectors to overcome the crisis while promoting the transition to greener, more equitable urban economies? Professor Amitsis, you have the floor.
Thank you again for the floor. For me, the key option here is the so-called local sustainable growth policies, often stated in Europe or in the United Nations vocabulary as sustainable development at the local or regional level. What is this option? This is, of course, economic development. We have not to forget the key role of markets in producing wealth across the globe that will attempt to satisfy the need of human needs, not only profit-making objectives, but in a manner that will sustain national resources and, of course, the broader protection of our environment for our future generations, including our children. How will sustainable economic growth will be achieved? If there will be a consensus, and we saw the negotiations last week about climate resilience across the globe, if we deliver a political and policy commitment, particularly at the regional and local level, that will manage all valuable resources. So here I include families. It's a very powerful, I agree with all of you, it's a very powerful social resource, family, in a manner that families will not be depleted, but will remain as, let's say, the most important social fabric for future generations. That means sustainable growth that will only focus on company profit-making objectives probably will create more risks in the future than expected. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Amitsis. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Francina, please.
Thank you. We can speak a lot about this, this answer, no? But I try to synthesize. First of all, support the credits. We have to support the credits for the smaller enterprises and the credits, the banker credits. Support professional training and long life learning. This is very important to overcome the crisis. We have to look at the future, but looking at the future means to give the right training for the businessmen, business people, and workers. Also, tax policies, which are very important. Tax policies. We can develop a new society, a new world without changing the idea, as Amitsis said, the idea of an economy based only on the gains. We have to share the gains. We have to change our idea. So I come back to education, long life education, new technologies, the development of new technologies to support the credit banks for the poorest people and the smaller enterprises, and a new policy about taxes. Stop.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Francina. I'm just going to give the floor to Ignacio now.
Yes, I think, as Antonio was saying, this is a very broad topic because we are talking about different subjects here. Smaller businesses, informal workers, at-risk sectors. I think we shouldn't forget that there is a global trend against all of them. And that will be there. That won't go away. And small businesses have to compete with much bigger multinational companies that are very well organized and that can reach the customers even easier than if those closer businesses around. Also, informal workers, I don't think, well, nearly any informal worker is informal because they want to. Usually is because they haven't found the way to become regular, to become formal. And third, also the at-risk sectors, I think after the pandemic, are nearly all of them or many of them. So we should consider that we are talking about a situation in which it's not easy to go against this global trend, and even less after the pandemic that has left many people with debts in a weaker situation. And then we had promoting the transition to greener and more equitable urban economies. So of course, this environmental factor is also very important. So I think we need to redefine many things. We need to devote a lot of time to find solutions with imagination, with great effort. I don't think we are ready for this yet. So my advice will be encouraging experts, and we have some here, but also other experts, to really think about it and to give new creative ideas that can actually help.
Thank you. Professor Michalski, you have the floor.
Thank you. Before I will answer the question, I must say what I have talked to Ignacio a few days ago. I'm personally fascinated with the fame. I don't know if the book is famous, by Ernst Fritz Schumacher, The Small is Beautiful. So we are talking about in this question, we talk about small things which are fragile, yes, more fragile. And I think this makes, I would give two answers. First answer is I would just mostly also agree with Professor Francina, what he said about this different economic and also educational, professional training and so on, possibilities for those smaller, for example, smaller businesses or people working informally, as a chance to compete or enter this competition. And second, I would also think that there is some necessary, as I gave this recommendation for family council, maybe some kind of sustainability council in the city, working with the city authorities, which also deals with this issue, how to make this whole, let's say, economic mix for the city, yes, which means that in different situations with different kinds of economic entities, for example, large companies are sometimes, quite often they're useful and so on and so on, but in some situations, in some aspects, they somehow, in the long run, they somehow, for example, erase the identity of the place, yes? So for example, let's imagine the city where you have only like fast food restaurants, yes? So and there are no some like local cuisine places. So I think that maybe some kind of again council which would give some recommendations on the basis of this specific situation in the city could be of use, of some possibility to do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Michalski. We turn to you, Professor Mokomane.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we all agree that participation in urban economies is very competitive, and this came very clear during the crisis. I know, at least in South Africa, and I know worldwide, where most small businesses were really kicked out or shut down by bigger ones. So I think we should take that into consideration and try to support them through various someone talked about competitive or enabling tax rates and things. I also agree that maybe competitive rates for services for small businesses, like what happened here was many small businesses they had to close because you pay the same rent wherever you are doing with a multinational company, really can't compete. So really take into consideration the needs of that. And I think some certain aspects of urban economies could be reserved for small businesses, simple things like sale of perishable goods. I know in some African countries, there will be a market where small business are supposed to go, but they're usually in the wrong side of town, if I can say, and very few, not really. But if we improve that, also this can also lead to greener and more sustainable economies. So basically, I agree with everyone, but I also think we have to make special arrangements to ensure that small businesses are sustainable and supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mokomane. And it's true. I mean, this is really fostering a lot of engagement among the youth, the private sector, and definitely the climate action. Now I turn to the next question. What is the main impact of urbanization on intergenerational relations regarding care and mental health? We start with you again, Professor Mitsis.
Okay, let me first focus on the selection of target groups affected by urbanization. I have defined three different target groups. First of all, children. Second, people with a disability, including, of course, children. And the last and most powerful, given that they have always in national and local settings also a very strong behavioral electorate impact, elderly people. All of these three categories face strong challenges regarding the availability of care and mental health services. Especially those who live in urban areas with non-available public service are de facto excluded. Despite the strong role of families and unpaid carers in the provision of services, I'm afraid that relevant needs are not able anymore to address by families themselves, particularly when families address social deprivation and income poverty problems. So they are not good carers, particularly in Europe. So my recommendation, we have to rediscuss again the introduction of the human rights approach in health and social care services, where the role of the market will be limited. Let's think again about the role of the state as providers of health and social care services. In this respect, I think that heavy investment across the globe is needed in a very often neglected area, which I will define as access to early childhood education and care before compulsory education. This is my strong recommendation, a very much politically debated area, early childhood education and care, particularly for those children living in neglected urban areas without availability of good care public services. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Turn to Mr. Francina.
Yes, it's not easy to give an answer, but in working class and in poor districts and neighbors, problems add to problems. We have some problems with the young generation, with the elderly, with disabilities, and we have to rethink the structure of our neighbors, our towns. We have to create new spaces of sociality and care also. Spaces where young people can live with elderly people. This is a problem. I think of about some experiences we have in Veneto, for example, with social housing, where young live with elderly people with disabilities, with new families, with children. This experiment works very well when there are the right rooms, the right space to live together. And for that reason, I say that we have to rethink the idea of town, to give in the town the right services for the families, for the people, but also the right room. In our, I'm speaking about Italy, but it's not, I don't think that in other towns in Europe is different, the problem is different. We have too much space for the automobile, for the autos, for the connection, transports. We don't have places for sports or live together. We need parks, for example, where the people can stay together. And this is from the main point. One of the point we have to rethink the idea and the structure of the town.
Thank you, Mr. Francina. Ignacio, you have the floor.
If we talk about intergenerational issues, I think we should always start by considering that aging population is something that we have there and we will have every day more, especially in third world countries, in developing countries, because it is already there in the rest of the world. So in that sense, I would suggest first, anything that can help the third age not to become the end of life can be very helpful, because we know now that we have many people in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, who can be very active, who can provide a lot of experience in many ways, who are probably, they don't have as many economic needs as others, and they can be really useful. In that sense, I want to mention here that I've always been impressed by some of the initiatives they have at the Veneto region to take advantage of these people who can help and want to help. Second idea, as a consequence, the role of grandparents in the family. This is something quite new, because before, grandparents were often too old, and also because parents now are busy and they need the help of grandparents. So how can we develop systems that really allow them to do it? I'm thinking now, for instance, in this family policy in Qatar, by which when a couple gets married, They have the right to find a house as close as possible to their parents, so to the grandparents. And third, I think we should also consider, talking about mental health, that we know we have learned during the pandemic that the most affected haven't been the eldest. At the beginning, it seemed that the eldest who were alone, who probably couldn't contact their children, their grandchildren. But then there are already several studies published that show that the most affected in their mental health have been the young girls, teenagers, or young in their 20s. So I think this can tell us a lot about how what we are doing with our young people, and how much they can learn from those who have lived much longer and maybe have experienced difficulties and have learned how to deal with them.
Thank you, Ignacio. Professor Michalski, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I am not, when it comes to these results, I am a bit not surprised because I know that children are the most affected by the pandemic. I think that most of the elders, or I don't know, maybe all of them, remember harder times. Some of them remember war. Some of them remember war, and the younger generation, I think, especially quite often raised in very comfortable conditions, at least in some Western countries. So when it comes to this intergenerational relations, I think that it's not a mystery that the city life and urbanization weakens these intergenerational ties. Sometimes because simply young people migrate to the city to study, they start a family, and the grandparents are outside the city. And in Poland, for example, it's not a studied topic, but I think there's a great, I think I'm pretty sure that grandparents are pretty important fertility factor. When the help and support of grandparents is accessible, yes, it's easier for the parents to have kids. So this is just a comment. And one thing that cities certainly weaken and even I would say sometimes destroy intergenerational relations. Care and mental health. There are studies which show that the city, the statistics show that unfortunately the cities are the places where becoming mentally ill is more probable. So there's greater chance for becoming mentally ill when you live in the city. So this is not, I think this is not unique to some area, and certainly this has to be taken into account. Once again, I think that it's much more difficult to let's say take care of the intergenerational family relationships and even to like develop good and stable and healthy relationships when you are when you live in the city, because I think also the city lifestyle seems to be more you're more often in a hurry, yes, more haste lifestyle. So of course this is not the full explanation, but I think that certainly urbanization makes our families, because in the end we have families, makes family life more challenging, and I would say more difficult and more stressful. Of course, in a statistical way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Michalski. Professor Makomane, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. At least in developing countries, but I think in most parts of the world as well, urbanization is driven by high levels of migration from rural to urban areas, but increasingly also we see a lot of regional migration. In South Africa, for example, there are high proportions of people who have migrated from neighboring countries like Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Malawi, and so on. And usually these are young people in the working age groups, and they typically leave their extended families, parents who are grandparents to their children back home. And obviously this has, as a result, has weakened intergenerational relations over time. The traditional support for caregiving responsibilities for domestic work is not there. So a lot of people are migrants and they don't have that intergenerational support or even just relationships. So people in urban areas, like everyone has said, are more likely to face high levels of work-family conflict, basically because they can't cope where they are, and also with the worry of who's caring for all, especially elderly parents in the place of origin. So there's compelling evidence that is emerging, and that has even been before the pandemic, that showed the negative impacts of this on mental health of urban residents. We see high levels of stress, depression, and anxiety, especially among women who are the major caregivers. So that's an issue that the question said the impact of urbanization on things. I think that's the major impact.
Thank you, Professor Makomane. Before turning to the next question, I just want to remind you to thank you, because till now it's been pretty good to stick to the 2 minutes. Not only because we want Mr. Francina to reach to the end, but also because it makes more efficient and easier for the rapporteur also if we state our policy recommendations for each question. So I turn to the next question now. How should urban morphologies be reconfigured to enhance their resilience and make them more sustainable and productive through inclusive planning? Professor Mitzes, you have the floor.
Thank you again. This is a very critical topic. In the University of West Attica, we have developed a new concept heavily influenced by the discussion that takes place since the 80s within the European Union. We may call it the local active inclusion ecosystem. What is that ecosystem? It's a multi-pillar approach of regional and local authorities. So we don't include only cities, but also regions in this discourse, with a very specific aim, not only to combat, but also to prevent. Don't forget the magic term prevention, poverty, social exclusion, and other social risks connected particularly with market failure through a concerted set of 3 different pillars: access to cash benefits, active employment measures, and of course, access to basic services, including education, healthcare, healthy nutrition, and housing. How we have decided to promote, to make a real term of this discourse through the so-called active inclusion policies at the local level that should facilitate not only the integration into the labor market of those people who can actually work, and this is very important because unemployment is the most serious cause of poverty across the globe. It's unemployment, not other social risks, but also measures that will provide support for social participation or social integration, according to the definition that we may use, for those people who cannot enter the labor market. Don't forget this specific part of the population, including children, people with a disability, single-parent families, carers, and of course, elderly people, and particularly those without any public entitlement to a pension. So my recommendation is the local active inclusion ecosystem based on this specific policy and political guidelines.
Thank you, Professor Mitzi. Mr. Francina, you have the floor.
So, as I said, in our towns, we have much more rooms, much more space for the cars instead of for the people. We have to regain the idea of living, not living in a hurry, but we have to live with another time. We don't know how technologies can help social inclusion in the town of the future. But we know that we have to change our way of living. Ignacio said a very important thing first. The international trend with the great multinational societies, companies, this trend is going to destroy our social way of living and to destroy our idea of towns. We have to rewrite the idea of towns as a social space and put in this new idea the family as a center of the community. We have to choose between the interests of the great companies or the good of the families and the people. To plan a new idea of town based on the family, not based on the cars and the interest of the great companies.
Thank you, Mr. Francina. Ignacio, you have the floor.
Antonio just mentioned something which I found very interesting, which is living in a hurry. And I can say that this is the situation in many South American cities I have visited for those who have a job. So for those who can be considered, successful. Public transportation systems are very bad, not to talk about Africa, for instance. So we make people devote a lot of time commuting, as they say here. And that is a problem. Why? Because that time is time they don't give to care, to their families, to something we all need. You know, that there was some years ago, there was this insistence in the concept of poverty of time. But I think it's true. If you have money, but you don't have time, then there is this lack of affection, of the affection we all need. And this is not only happening in developing countries. I was astonished to learn, for instance, that in Paris, they have built this new city of the justice for thousands of people working there. And they didn't thought while it was being built in how people will get there. So now it's very complicated for them because there are no public transportation accessible lines, not enough parking places, etc. So I think this is, if we want families to really be able to fulfill their role and to reach the well-being they deserve, we need to design smaller cities inside the big city so that they don't need to travel long distances on a daily basis.
Thank you, Ignacio. Professor Michalski?
Thank you. I'm thinking when it comes to this designing cities as a good places to live, because I think that's what's the idea. So I also agree with Professor Franzina that this let's say, the heart of the city. Maybe it may sound a bit romantic, but the family is the heart of the city, which means that when we think about the city development, we rather think that the city will develop in an organic, evolutionary way. Yes. So, for example, we will not be flooded by thousands of like migrants from rural areas in a week. Yes. We rather think that, of course, the city will grow because that's normal, rather normal way of the things go, but it will grow organically. And the best organic growth is the growth based on the family, because that's the way the family grows. Yes. So it means that if we did this, if we think about such growth, we should, as a city, concentrate on the family. And for example, and in terms of designing the city and making these planning decisions, it, for example, may mean that we can transfer the idea that sometimes is discussed on this state level, that we have, for example, this triple test. Yes, that before we make some decision or some new legal act, we ask ourselves what impact will it have on economy, what impact will it have on nature, and what impact will it have on society. So in these terms, maybe it also implementing this kind of triple test for the cities design and city planning could be useful, that each decision should be like also tested in this dimension of how will it influence family living and people thinking about building a family in this city or that. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Professor Michalski, thank you. I'll give the floor now to Professor Mokomani.
Okay, I agree that in terms of demographic, we need to understand urban centers in terms of the demographic needs of individuals and families when we do our urban planning, so that it's inclusive. In South Africa, for example, Pretoria and Johannesburg, which are more developed, beautiful road networks, but it doesn't matter whether you live 5 minutes away from work, you need to drive. Why? Because you can't walk, you can't cycle, because there are just basically no spaces for that. And you can see that if you want sustainable and more greener environments, those are things that you should consider. When Ignacio was talking about what happens in Paris, is the same thing. Between Johannesburg and Pretoria is a major commuting area, and there's a fast train that goes to Johannesburg between the two cities every day. But you have to drive, most people have to drive to the station 30 minutes, then take the, so really you might as well just drive to Johannesburg, because you can see that the inflation didn't look at that. And it does impact families in a way, because the 2-3 hours that you spend on the traffic, if it was more efficient, and then you could be at home with family and children. And so I agree with everyone, maybe really when we are planning for inclusive, make it more inclusive, and where the family lands in our planning, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mokomani. I'm actually happy that many topics that are really keen to our partners for these preparations have been commented, like the ECD, early childhood development, that is a priority for many of us. And we've been seeing studies from the Doha International Family Institute. Also, the intergenerational relations, that is also another topic for inclusive social development of DESA, and care, that has been through this whole question, that I know that is really keen for Haro and Felpa, that are part of this partnership. So now I turn to the next question. How can flexible and innovative institutional and financial frameworks be developed through a more integrated, cooperative, multi-level governance in a post-COVID era? Professor Mitzis, you have the floor.
Thank you again. For me, the key idea in this particular question is the use of multi-level governance processes. It's very critical across the globe. What is my recommendation for this discussion today? Contrary to the use of economic development or even sustainable growth, national strategies, action plans, or pacts, there is no broad discussion today, not only in Europe, through the continent, about the development of national family pacts. What will be an ideal definition of this pact? It will be an agreement between the national government, the regional and local authorities that will sign up a political declaration in the form of a pact, committed to coordinate and synchronize their policy agendas in order to focus their action and financial resources, not only in the economic or financial development area, but also for promoting family-driven goals and targets. This is something that is missing. What will be the advantage of a national family pact? And I think that the International Federation for Family Development would be seriously discuss this opportunity. It should allow all political forces in a given national settlement draft and implement family policies in partnership and, of course, monitor their progress. To this end, a pact should aim at setting national and possibly regional or local targets with resources when necessary as a top of national government resources, define indicators and targets other than just increasing the GDP, implementing flagship initiatives about families and particularly with families with children, and of course identify obstacles and barriers to the achievements of the targets, both at national and regional local level. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ritsis. That was pretty well structured. Mr. Francino?
There is an old motto, think globally and act locally. And this is the key, one key, an opportunity. Subsidiarity is the key of the future. We, family, community, towns, regions, must have the right tools to rule over their reality. We are speaking about financial frameworks. Who controls the finance? Nowadays, there are rating agencies that can sanction the success or the failure of the state. But who are rating agencies? Who are this group who can manage our future and change our future? From this point, I say that financial flows must be brought back under public control. This is another key. So the first, think globally, share experience as we are doing together, but act locally and bring back to the public the financial flows. We can't live with banks, rating agencies, few rich people who rule over the world. 1% of the richness of the world is shared between the majority of the population, and 1% of the population has the main part of the richness of our world. Is it possible to live in this way? I ask you, it's impossible. We have to change this situation. We saw in Glasgow, for example, what was the main problem in Glasgow, COP26? They were unable to give an answer. Who can pay for the transition? Who can pay for the poor countries? And we were not able to give an answer. We have, as I said, to bring back to the public the financial flows, the richness.
Thank you, Mr. Rentina. Ignacio, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I've written down the suggestion of Professor Amitsis, and I'm sure that at IFFD, International Federation for Family Development, we will be able to discuss about this, because I think it's really very interesting. Also, everything that Antonio has said is very interesting, and I do agree a lot. So on the top of that, I wanted also to mention our experience with regional and local governments through the Venice Declaration. We have realized that when we work with national governments, member states of the UN, it is sometimes very difficult for them to really be down to earth and to understand what's going on in the different parts of their countries. That's why we turn to local governments, because we realize that they are much more aware of what's going on. And also, of course, there are different situations in different parts. And also, our main finding I wanted to share is that regional governments have been a great help. For instance, not only, of course, the Benetton region present here, but recently we had, for instance, this Kujawsko-Pomorskie region in Poland discussing and voting in the regional parliament the Venice Declaration to see how it could be applied to their 19 main cities. And then organizing a meeting with the mayors and coordinating, which I think it's a very important verb to use here, what they are going to do. We had the same yesterday in the regional parliament of Querétaro in Mexico, for instance. They were discussing about this, and next week I will be in Mexico also for some other regional parliaments. So my suggestion will be, let's try local governments to coordinate better with regional governments and national governments. It depends on the size of the country, so that there can be really a coordinated action, because we know that most of the times political interests, etc., I'm not going to get into that, come first, and then they are not able to really make this coordination.
Thank you, Ignacio. Give the floor now to Professor Michalski. You have the floor.
Thank you. When it comes to the part of this financial frameworks, it's not I would not, probably I'm not able to say anything interesting or innovative. But when it comes to this institutional frameworks, I would give the example for some possible interaction that we have in Poland. It's not, in fact, something implemented already, but there is the idea that for example, when it comes to the family policy, of course, some demographic strategy and all the like general tools are developed and designed on this macro level. So, and this should go. This is the idea that there is the post of in every governors of the region office, there is the design is that there will be a so-called the representative of the families of the governor, and he will be a kind of like interface who would try to translate the macro solutions into this local level of how in this special area this family policies, this family tools could be implemented and could be effective. And then he also, it's very good if he has the support of the family council in this on the level that he is, and of course this council and this representative is also oriented towards putting the ideas and implementing the ideas down to all the local how to say, local communities. So this is all I can like add to this, and probably it's nothing more that I have really like prepared and ready to present. Thank you.
Appreciate Professor Michalski. Professor Mokomani, please.
Okay, I also don't have much on this, but I just wanted to say yesterday I was in another conference on social protection, and one of the points that came up was how COVID has shown us the importance of being adaptive and flexible. So I think it's also relevant here that in the post-COVID era, we make sure that institutional and financial frameworks are flexible and able to adapt to unforeseen shocks. I also agree with the recommendation to share experiences, because if we are in this together, I think in terms of multi-level governance, maybe share experiences, because our final goal is the same. So if I've worked with a framework that has been successful, it will be for the benefit of all and all families to sorry. So that will be my short contribution to this.
Thank you, Professor Mokomani. And actually, I'm happy that we also mentioned the need of commitment to help, and in many ways the distribution of wealth, because other partners that are part of this kind of partnership are ELFAC and NOE, who are like in associations and confederations in Europe that host the will and needs of many large families, and we're really aware of that. Now I turn to the last question before we can kind of open the floor for any issue or challenge that you may have. And this is also in many ways calling for the next megatrends that we've been exploring, or we're going to explore. So the question says, how can local authorities reduce the risks posed to families due to climate change and demographic challenges? Professor Omitis, please, you have the floor.
Thank you again. I believe that this is the most locally driven questions of our discussion today, a territorial-based question, the role of local authorities. So I include both regions and municipalities, a very useful distinction. So, what local authorities could do? First, they should identify and understand the risks. But here we are facing two great constraints. First, at least across Europe, regions and municipalities do not have legal competencies and financial means to address problems related to climate change or demography. This is competencies of national governments, which have both political and financial power to deal with environment and demography. Second constraint may be more important. regions and municipalities do not have technical expertise to address complex issues related to climate change and demography. What is my recommendation? Interested local and regional authorities, if they are capable to understand and highlight these risks, they should invest on formulating the so-called local family development action plans. What is this concept? These are action plans designed and ratified by the political bodies of local and regional authorities. The national government is not interfering here. And as far as their context is concerned, they should in principle address multidimensional family poverty, climate poverty, migration issues. We have to include migration and asylum seeking as a key risk, at least for the discussion in Europe. And last but not least, regeneration of places with low fertility rates and small number of families with children, the so-called family-friendly regional planning. My last recommendation, if political elites could decide to invest on these action plans, they should also monitor and evaluate their implementation. Monitoring and evaluation is always a very critical factor. Of course, something that may be of importance for you, last week, my university submitted directly to the biggest regional authority of Greece, the region of Attica, where our capital, Athens, is located, a proposal together with the Greek Association of Large Families about the development of this family development action plan that could be supported by a relevant observatory, a family-friendly observatory that could address problems linked particularly to the lack of technical expertise at the center of regional or local authorities. So my recommendation here is that first, political elites should understand, then they should respond through investing with the use of family development action plans. Thirdly, they should monitor and evaluate. And lastly, they should include the civil society family groups in the monitoring and evaluation through the establishment of these observatories. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mikis, and then congratulations for that observatory. I'm sure there's going to be key to progress on family policies. Now I turn to Mr. Francina, who's really aware of these challenges, not only because he represents a local and regional authority, but also because he lives in this city that is challenged by climate change and demographic challenges.
Yes, as you know, as you said, I am working and I'm speaking from Venice, a place which pays a tribute to the change, to climate change. So I can give you some small suggestions, but I think that they're important. It is true that the climate change and demographic challenges are international issues. So we need an international frame. But at the local level, we can work, for example, organize civil protection services and care services, use technologies to inform citizens and create and spread a culture of safety. For example, in this town, in Venice, when there is the high water, In the phone, you can write SMS, a message from the administration. Pay attention, at this hour, you can risk walking in the town. No, this is a form of technologies that can be useful, informing the people about a risk, or also informing the people where they can go, where they can find services. But as Ignacio Socias said at the very beginning of this meeting, education is another key word. Because if we can inform the public opinion about a lot of problems, as you see, for example, for the earthquake in Japan, they can fight the earthquake because they have a culture about earthquake, and we have to gain we need a new culture about the climate change, and of course a new culture about the demographic problem. And education, as Ignacio said at the very beginning, is the key for education, and of course new technologies. With the new technologies, the local authorities can work, can give a service to their citizens. I'm sorry, but I have to leave because I have another meeting. So thank you very much, and I beg you a pardon for my terrible English. And so I hope to see you again as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Pentino. Thank you for making time for us. I mean, it's complicated. I know that maybe you have even high water today. So take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ignacio now.
Yes, well, we need to acknowledge that in most cases, local authorities, as Professor Mitzes was saying, have no competences to make decisions. But maybe their role is more sending information and contributing to help the national government. Because there are many things that are happening all the time, new things that national governments should know about. For instance, we have now, as a consequence, partly of climate change, energy poverty. So how are families addressing these in different parts of the world? Or we're now facing this lack of resources, which somehow are a consequence also of the demographic challenges. And for instance, in Spain, we're talking a lot about the future of pensions, precisely as a consequence of the low fertility rate. So I think local authorities that, as I was saying before, are closer to citizens, have this role to send information. And for this, I have a very specific suggestion that I've seen in quite a few cities, similar to the observatory, but it's just to establish a family council. So some representatives of families that can be in regular contact with local authorities and make sure that they get the right information about what's going on regarding these topics.
Thank you, Ignacio. Professor Michalski, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I think that this question deals with this issue of the contribution of the families to the development of the city or local community, which is pretty often ignored or underestimated. I would give the example of some for example, waste management fees, payments in different local governments in Poland, where in some places the large families are respected, and in some places, well, the scientific calculations, in fact, which show that in case of waste management, large families do not mathematically produce as much waste more as many people live in the family. So there are different calculations. We have also some available. So I think that in terms of this question, I would look at it as an issue that the families should be protected against injustice, because in some cases I think that for example, families quite often shown as a biggest like threat to nature and the biggest source of pollution and so on and so on. And at the same time, the whole issue of human capital production, which I mentioned, like social protection, social safety, social, I would say, how to call it, the way that family, for example, balances the different risks, economic risks, for example, is neglected and not respected. So I think that in terms of these risks, first step is to have a like objective and based on real data outlook on how much families contribute to the situation and how much more they contribute to the functioning of our community, and then the discussion about how different groups or different inhabitants should be treated should be like started. Of course, there is this issue because I know that this question also deals with this, for example, topics of growing costs of energy. Yes, in Poland there are some like discussions and plans. How can we help families and people in general be able to deal with this growing costs of energy, for example. So of course these are these issues, but I would, as I said, I would start from this justice perspective of the contribution that family makes to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Michalski. Now we turn to Professor Mokomani.
Okay, thank you. I'm speaking from an extremely hot Pretoria, like really, you feel like you're in an oven. And yesterday the temperature was about 42 degrees Celsius. In the evening, we have this massive thunderstorm. It was welcome because it cooled, but in the morning, all trees were falling down and things like that. And I'm saying this because the government has also said, and we are regularly getting periodic, regular power cuts and in some areas, water restrictions. And the government has warned that this might be the case in the next 5 years. And I'm saying this because this shows some of the risk posed by climate change. And at least in Africa, I think we really have no choice but to steer away from non-renewable energy sources. It doesn't make sense, at least for me, that in Africa, where we only have 2 months of winter, basically the rest of the year is hot and we still depend on coal and if we could go, the solar system use gray water systems and so on. And I think, like the last speaker said, maybe support families to adapt to these issues. People could do it, but what we have talked about, poverty, inequality, lack of income security, very few people can afford that. And what do people do? Go back to firewood, coal, and then it's a vicious circle. So to answer the question, how can local authorities reduce the risk, support families with to adapt to more and to get away from non-renewable energy resources? Thank you. And then just finally, in terms of demographic challenges, I'll just say, let's weigh the demographic dividend lens. I think we have talked about it. Ensure quality education and health services, job creation, and good governance. I think that's a very important issue to address this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mokomani. And now I turn to the last question that is kind of pretty open. If you have any other issue or challenge that you want to raise, please feel free to say it. I turn first to Professor Amitsis.
Okay. If we could summarize what issues or challenges were discussed today, I could view poverty, demography, and climate change. Okay. And we also paid attention of public or semi-public policies to address these challenges or issues. I would contribute to the question about issues or challenges, adding two new areas of very both policy and political concern. The first is migration and asylum. Given that this is a highly politically polarized debate, I could just tell you that 50% of third country nationals having families inside the European Union area are at serious risk of poverty last year. What does it mean? That migration is not, particularly during the COVID-19 crisis, is not linked to financial prosperity for migrants, but with increased risks of poverty and social inclusion. That means the majority of third country nationals with families in European Union are not able to satisfy living standards. And probably there will be very strong regional variation, particularly in countries like Italy and Greece, with high rates of migrants and asylum seekers. The second issue, perhaps most challenging from a financial perspective, housing affordability and deprivation, closely linked to energy poverty and energy stability risks. Why is that important? Because families, and particularly families with more children, faced increased risks nowadays to guarantee an adequate housing. What an adequate housing means? It's a house that meets accepted national technical standards, is in a reasonable state of repair, provides a reasonable degree of thermal comfort, and is available and accessible at an affordable cost for parents and the children. So my recommendation is do not forget migration and asylum, and do not forget housing affordability and housing deprivation as key challenges for the prosperity of families. Thank you.
Perfect, Professor Amitsis. Ignacio, you have the floor.
Yes, just wanted to add some information, because maybe you have asked yourselves why we chose these particular questions and not others. Well, most of them are inspired on the topics of the next World Urban Forum, which, as I just copied in the chat box, will be held next June in Poland, precisely. And I think it is a great occasion, as much as we can do it, to make sure that families are included in the conclusions, because the risk is to forget about families when we talk about development and we talk about public policies, and then to suffer the consequences of not having them on board. So that's why I encourage all of you, of course, to be part of this in the way you possibly can, or maybe also to help us to be present there with your contributions. And I think this is a general idea we should consider when we talk about cities. What is the role of families and why they should be considered, why they should be listened, etc. Well, I take also this opportunity to thank you very much for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Professor Michalski, you have the floor now, since I think you've been mentioned in Poland.
Yes, yes. Katowice is a place I've been to. So the issues that I would also add to the catalog that we have discussed is there are two things. One of them is the challenge that I see living in in fact, for 5 years already, I've been living outside of the city, and the rest of my former life, I've been living in a city. So having family, I know that from the perspective of having family, I see the difference, for example, and that's what I want to talk about, is that I mean the cultural and media climate that you have in the big cities. I mean all the advertisements, the billboards, and so on, which automatically, when you have a family and you go with kids, your kids see everything. Yes, and I think this also makes a difference because, of course, to simplify, you can say that when you live outside of the city, you don't have as many occasions for your kids to see the things that probably are not pro-family in general. Yeah. So I think it makes a difference. It makes, I think, because we talk here about whether in terms of family, we could ask the question, is it better to raise your kids in the city, or is it better to raise your kids in the rural areas, for example? Yes. Of course, in terms of different places of the world, rural areas means something different. So this is obvious. But what I mean is the issue that probably could be somehow touched is whether sustainable cities should not be also paying attention to the pro-family climate in terms of this whole area of advertisements, which I mentioned. So this is one thing. And second thing that comes to me is maybe some useful method for developing the sustainable city identity, I would call it that way, would be the idea that I know that functions in Poland and in many European countries, and I think it's also in different places of the world. I mean the city partnerships, which probably I'm not sure most of the people from Europe know, which means that there are some mutual two-part long-term partnerships between different cities, which mean that cities are in a contact and they, for example, can exchange some good practices. And because most often, for example, the situation is that the partnerships are made between the cities from different countries, but cities which are in some terms similar to each other. Yes, for example, my city Poznań has a partnership with Hanover in Germany. There, for many reasons, these cities are similar. So it may be, in terms of looking for some, let's say, sustainable solutions for the city, this kind of cooperation, long-term cooperation, may be useful in looking and developing such solutions, also in terms of family policies. So this is the second and last of my things I wanted to mention. And thank you once again for invitation. And it's been a very, very interesting and very good time, also in terms that I have learned a lot. So greetings to you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Michalski. And well, I turn to Professor Mokomane. I love that she has the African perspective and is pretty valuable here.
Okay, thank you very much. For me, another issue or challenge, I'll just say definitely mental health. I think we've talked about that, and the pandemic has shown us that, and at least from the, it might be different in other parts, but at least from the African perspective, like I was saying, the basics of dealing with mental health issues is usually things like simple like exercise. And like I was saying, in Pretoria, in Johannesburg, in most African countries, you can't even take a walk without risking being hit by a car or anything. You'll have a whole suburb or a whole settlement without a park. So if you have children, where do you go to? So I think especially in the post-COVID area, we really should think about that and other issues just in terms, apart from the structural planning of cities, things that have also come up like, and that affect families. And I think anxiety, someone said once, it's going to be the second, not anxiety, mental health issues are going to be a second epidemic after this. And I think our city should take that into consideration in planning. It's things that sometimes we forget, but they really, and especially when, like what we are talking, where urban residents are usually isolated, no intergenerational relations, and can feel isolated and lonely. We need that kind of support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mokomane. And well, we have reached the end of the focus group, and I really thank you all for all your contributions. Also your presence here in YouTube and definitely Zoom. I appreciate that Renata is here participating closely to these preparations, and we know each other very well since I was not here yet, but they were also preparing with some other partners or the same ones that the other preparations for the 2014. And I would just like to add that I really thank you for keeping the time, and we have accomplished this in less than 2 hours, actually. So I really thank you for all your time and your contributions, and I hope that we can have them pretty quick. And for this, we have the Kun here present following the discussion. I see Renata's. I'm gonna give the word to Renata.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alex. Hello to Zita, my good friend. I'm so glad to see you here. I would like to thank you, first of all, for organizing this group. And secondly, for all your inputs and really interesting remarks. And
I think we don't listen very well. Can you hear, Renata? I can't. I just very distant.
Yeah, it's very faint.
Maybe I have to adjust this audio settings here. Okay, I did it maximum now. Is it better?
Now it's better.
Oh, okay. So thank you once again for having this meeting, organizing this group. And this is very useful for our preparations for the IYF plus 30. I just wanted to say that I was really, I appreciated especially the focus of designing cities on infrastructure to be family friendly, what Zita said, what Mr. Franzini said, many of you. It's really to make cities more livable for families. So I think this is also the focus of the Sustainable Development Goal 11. So thinking about green spaces for families to interact, for all generations to be able to, live a decent life in the cities. And I am very grateful for the sustainable aspects of what you said about the cities, because this is really like the SDG 11 really talks a lot about sustainability in the cities also. So thank you for all this. So just to say that this topic will be continued to be discussed in next year. This is our focus topic, plus migration for next year. So I hope to follow up on the findings of the group and have other meetings, and maybe for others to join. And just to say that we will reflect your conclusions in the report of the Secretary General that will be prepared for next year. So I'm very grateful for all your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata. And now I have to end this before it's 2 hours, so we can keep it within 2 hours. And thank you so much for all. I don't know if somebody else wants to say some words. If not, we keep in contact. And thank you for all